So that segues us into our second section of this facilitated session,
Yes.
which we will discuss the key skills that is assessed.
The thinking skills.
Yes. So what about the skills? Okay. What are the thinking skills that the MCAT is really attempting to measure with how the exam is built?
So the science sections have 4 key thinking skills, and they're called scientific reasoning and inquiry skills. Now, just think about that title: scientific reasoning and inquiry skills.
It's a lot of sentences.
Exactly,
Oh,
because we need to kind of analyze what's happening, and through an inquiry or asking questions, right? Through inquiry, we can then ask questions and analyze what's happening. And so there are 4 thinking skills that you actually utilized earlier in the first segment when you were giving us some feedback on, okay, well, how do we connect this to like a real exemplar when we talked about the chemical and physical foundations of biological systems and we did Ohm's law. So let's run through it. The first is knowledge of scientific concepts and principles, right? Knowledge of scientific concepts and principles. What's your knowledge about Ohm's law? What do you know about it? So those are the basic sort of recall information. But then the next skill is, can you put together some understanding and use it to solve a problem? That is scientific reasoning and problem solving. That's your second skill, scientific reasoning and problem solving. That's a big skill to have because remember, you're going to be solving problems in medicine. So our third skill in this science section, if you will, is going to be reasoning about the design and execution of research. And you give a little coming attraction of that because we love to put research into these passages and then have the scholar analyze what's happening. That's skill 3. And skill 4 is data-based and statistical reasoning, where we give you charts, graphs, and other information from which you must extrapolate from what's being presented. So those 4 skills are being assessed for each concept. So if I asked you to run those 4 skills across Ohm's law and putting you on the spot again, how would you do it?
So if I'm running those skills, those 4 specific skills against Ohm's law and let's just say the heart, in terms of concept, right? We are recognizing that charge, current also applies to the heart context, the heart skills. So the concepts of charge, movement, and resistance and how that relates to the cellular membrane and voltage of our heartbeat.
I love it. That's skill 1. Skill 2.
Skill 1, problem solving. I got my little notes to help me. Problem solving.
Good.
So is recognizing how it applies to the cardiac membrane, potential things that we talked about before, like refractory period, depolarization, repolarization, how all of those concepts interconnect. So if we go into our third thinking skill, which is research and reasoning, that might ask the student to interpret a research experiment that's going on. Let's just say the voltage clamp.
Oh, yeah, that's one of everyone's favorites.
Seen that many times, right? And how this voltage clamp experiment explains the movement of ions within a charged system.
Yes.
And then our fourth thinking skill, which is data statistics, can show up as us having to interpret figures or graphs within the vignette and being able to answer the question.
Exactly. It could be from that same passage that was a research passage. One question requires you to actually interpret your understanding about the experiment itself. In your exemplar, well, what's happening with ions movement through a channel with a voltage clamp experiment.
Right.
And then in that same passage, they may give you a chart, which are the data outcomes. And now you must look at that data and do the interpretation. By the way, I want to have a funny with you on this one because I love the way, as all of our scholars do, we give sometimes abbreviated versions of the skills, skill 3 being research and reasoning, and skill 4 just being database and statistics. Those are nice abbreviations,
Nice
right?
abbreviation.
And it's okay.
For someone who was a few years
That
out
is
from the
correct.
MCAT.
It's
Yeah.
okay. I just want to make that note again. But again, we'll be mastering all 4 skills, right? And the goal of that is to keep the practice in front of us. And that's why we said, even having that ritual of a little blueprint of the full skill is great. Now, here's the key, though. Quite frankly, once you master those skills, then you can do a little abbreviation because you know where you're going with it.
Right.
It's encoded. But I just wanted to have a little fun with you on that
Well,
because our scholars will do that as well.
Well, speaking of skills, we talked about those 4 specific skills.
Yes.
But we also earlier mentioned that CARS, which is the critical analysis
Yes.
and reasoning skills
Thank you.
section of, going back to our structure, our MCAT structure, how the exam is structured, these have its own unique set of skills that the MCAT, I'll just call them the MCAT folks, the MCAT people that make the exam,
Yes.
is testing. So just, can you break those 3 things down?
Yes, let's review those again. So those skills, the first is foundations of comprehension, which in essence assesses, does the scholar understand what has been presented in a passage? Do you simply understand the information that's been shared? The second skill is reasoning within the text, meaning once we give you a body of information, can you draw some conclusions based on what you read, based on that situation that's in front of you, not something different. Now, we'll get into our testing strategies later, but sometimes scholars will change the situation that's in front of them by inappropriately bringing in external information. And that's not the skill. The skill is draw your conclusions based on what is in front of you. And then the third skill is reasoning beyond the text, where you draw new conclusions, but it's still based on an understanding of where you started, but now there's a different situation that you're being presented with that has some relevance to what was given to you initially, but they've now given you a new situation that's different from where you started. So you can make adjustments in your thinking. We call it extrapolation. Now, based on understanding, what would you do in this other situation? That's called reasoning beyond the text.
And these 3 particular thinking skills, foundations of comprehension, reasoning within the text, and reasoning beyond the text, I alluded to it a little earlier, but I want to bring this back because when we talk about how these thinking skills from this section, CARS, that is non-science based,
Yes.
and how important it is of a skill to have for doctors. So when you have your patient coming into the exam room, you're not going to get a textbook patient 9 times out of 10. The patient is not going to come in and just pathognomically present as gallstone,
Exactly.
or cholecystitis,
Exactly.
or some type of migraine situation, right? So there's going to be your objective data that you're going to be looking for that supports your differential, which are, what is your physical saying? If you did your neuro exam, what are the information that you're extrapolating from your physical exam? What are the objective data from possibly your labs? What are the labs showing you? And how does that data support your differential diagnosis, right? But then also the subjective, and this goes into a whole nother conversation about when we talk about how our medical note taking is set up, and one of the examples is a SOAP note format. But when we talk about the subjective aspect of the history and physical, is what is the patient, what are some of the things that the patient is telling me about their presenting illness? What are some of the things that I'm reading from my chart check when I go in and check and I see other past encounters from this patient? How does that incorporate into extrapolating information? What are the social determinants that I'm familiar with this patient is coming from that adds to this disease process?
Absolutely.
What are the genetic factors, based off of the history that's already in the exam? The electronics chart, right? So when you talk about these cognitive or learning skills that's associated specifically with this CAR section, it's very important for that patient encounter. These are skills that is going to aid you greatly in being able to come up and craft that differential diagnosis and be able to slice and dice what don't fit. If the objective data is not fitting a cholecystitis, then you can cut it right up off the list. If the imaging that you're looking at, is definitively not supporting that, but this is allowing you to hone in and fine tune that skill of being able to take other data points that's not textbook in front of you, that's not memorization, the memorization piece in front of you, to give you that confidence and power to be able to diagnose your patient and treat them.
So on point. And again, we're cultivating intentional behaviors, right? Of thinking and understanding. And that's a core competency of your professional identity as a future physician. So that's when we go back to the initial purpose of the exam. It's not just about who gets into medical school or not. It's about, can you develop and demonstrate behaviors around problem solving in medicine? What is your ability to do that? And it's not just for, okay, I took the MCAT. It's for your continuing mastery as you learn new information throughout medical school, as you learn information as a resident and as a physician, you will continue to use these skills.
Right. And, that continuing mastery piece, because all of the things that we talk about here at FS is a building, it's a composite, right? And so just like Dean Princey Kumar said, in my introduction, our orientation week, medicine is like, throwing, mud against the wall. You're not going to catch the first thing, and get the full picture with that first sling. But you can keep throwing, you keep adding things to your toolkit, such as your wellness framework, such as your structure, understanding the structure of your MCAT, then understanding the specific skills that the MCAT examiners are looking to measure for you. So then that goes into this last part, segues into our third section, is how does this all work to a strategy? Right. What do we need to look at from our skills and our structure preparation to build an effective strategy that actually works, DT?
I love it.
That actually works.
That's right. So now we're ready. Now we're ready. And for our scholars, it's so important to build the foundation, because too often we're missing some of these pieces, right? We're missing the pieces. So now we're ready to set an actual plan of study that will allow us to have effective learning strategies. Now remember, in the first FS in this series, we started strong with the wellness plan.
Right.
So wellness is going to be part of this longitudinal plan for success. It has to be. Otherwise, we'll have the burnout, right? Because we're only focused on performance. Now, with that, the plan must first have the MCAT blueprint structure and skills as an anchor. So let's reasonably say now that you are experts in the MCAT structure and the skills. Now, we know that's going to take some work. That doesn't happen overnight. So scholars, again, don't try to bypass this too fast. That's a key part of your plan. With the structure and the skills, now we go to step 2 in your plan. Every time you lay out your review for the science sections, because now you say, I need to review the content longitudinally for the 3 science sections. That's perfect. But now when you're reviewing that content, use the foundational concepts. We'll talk more about that in the next FS, but use the foundational concepts that are outlined for those MCAT science sections as your guide for the content review. But now you must add the skills piece to it. The 4 thinking skills. You must take each concept, as DJ, you did, and run it through each one of those 4 skills. That's how we know you're ready to demonstrate your understanding of that concept as it relates to a purpose in medicine. Your understanding of Ohm's law, if it was from one of those 3 science sections, across those 4 skills as it relates to the purpose of medicine. And as it relates to the non-science section, critical analysis or reasoning skills or CARs, we'll have some strategies for your next session. But every time you read a passage that's non-science information, you should be focusing on this passage could be something my future patient's going to share with me. Am I understanding what's being shared? Foundations of comprehension. It's not
It's a
about
good
content.
strategy.
There are no foundational concepts in the critical analysis of reasoning skills because it's not about content. So it's about, do I understand what I'm reading? And, can I reason about that information, draw some conclusions, and can I extrapolate about it? So having the blueprint now with your content review allows you to move away from memorization to integration and connection. Especially for the science sections, you need to connect it either to biological systems, the whole mammalian system, right? Or to dimensions of behavior. And with respect to the critical analysis and reasoning skills, is connected to some real world context like the social determinants of health or what's happening in the cultural frame, etc. Right? So that is your step 2. When you connect the blueprint now in your study plan, you are executing on that on a daily basis. Now, step 3 requires you now to also be ready for the cognitive intensity, the thinking intensity, cognitive or thinking intensity of the exam, which means along the way in your plan, we must prepare for that full day testing experience. Preparing for the full day testing experience has a couple of components. What is your wellness plan for the full day experience? Because remember, wellness should be longitudinal,
Right.
but when you do your
But also
practice for the
having
full
a
day
day of
experience,
exam.
that's right. What is your wellness plan for that? That's one. Number 2, are you ready by section to execute the MCAT structure and skills? Right? You need to run that process again because that's happening on game day. Remember, you've been practicing that way, but now you're doing, in essence, a mock exam day. What's my wellness for that day? And am I ready to apply the MCAT blueprint in real time as if it was exam day? My first section is chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. Do I apply the foundational concepts and forward thinking skills? My second section is critical analysis and reasoning skills. Do I apply the 3 reasoning skills for that section? Third and fourth sections, again, are science sections: biological and biochemical foundations of living systems, and psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior. Will I apply those foundational concepts and the forward thinking skills? That's what I'm doing on that quote unquote mock exam day with my wellness embedded throughout that I've been practicing that we talked about in the first FS. This allows us, we should have at least 4 mock exam days, at least 4 mock exam days so that we can prepare for the real exam day. So that's our quote unquote practice test. And then the last piece is to always remember, how do we connect back to our purpose? Keep our purpose. Remember the GPS that through this entire process, we're going to have a growth mindset because there are going to be areas of challenge. We're going to grow through them. We keep our purpose and relevance of who we're trying to serve in the future of medicine at our forefront, and we stay connected to family, friends, and mentors through a sense of belonging. GPS is our anchor throughout the entire plan.
Right. And these were, very great. And I just, have probably about 3 to add for myself. So when we talked about reflection of purpose, but also reflection of your practice, right? So what worked, what didn't work. And I know, you have the term error analysis.
Error analysis log, that is correct.
So when you're going through your exam, did I answer this question based off of simply recall? If I got this question wrong, was it a thinking error? Was it a testing error? Was it a knowledge content error? So being able to have what we call these exam wrappers. So after you take this simulated or practice exam, or you do your practice blocks every morning, and you're going over your wrong or right answers, you're doing an error analysis, not just checking which ones you got wrong and how much it adds to this 520 that you're going for, but you're looking at, why did you get this particular question wrong? What is the topic that you got this content wrong in? So if this might be a thinking error in a GI context, where this might be a content error within the cardiovascular context,
Yes.
right? And so being able to develop that skill and having this exam wrapper to reflect on your practice and reflect on performance that you've done in a simulated context is very important. And so having that skill to not really, be so focused on the science-based stuff that we're neglecting the non-science section of the cars, or the critical analysis and reasoning section. And then the last is building the flexibility. So the MCAT rewards adaptability. So being
Absolutely.
able to change your thinking based off of the vignettes, the prompts, in real time, and being able to not go to a default of panic, but to analyze what's in front of you and tap into the thinking skills that based off of your practice that the examiners are asking you for, and to put it into practice. I remember one time me and you was going through some practice exam questions, and I got a question, or you was going through the question, and off top, automatically I wasn't able to completely recall what the answer was. And you said something very pivotal. You was like, you automatically went to what you don't know. What do you know about this
Exactly.
question?
Exactly.
And that right there changed the game a lot for me, because in you saying that, I realized, which I didn't realize before because it's subconscious, it's automatic,
Yes.
that when I get to a question that I can't automatically slice and dice, even if it's not a level 1 question, let's just say it's a level 4 or 5, and I know this, but if it's a level 4 or 5 and I have to think a little bit more, you automatically start the checklist of what you don't know. When you made a very good point, is to you focused on what you don't know. What do you know about this? And then I listed all of the things about that particular topic domain that I did know, and we was able to answer the question because I didn't frantically and panically go to this default of I don't know this thing right off
That's
the
a
bat.
great example of why we practice throughout our study plan the process of error analysis, which incorporates the MCAT blueprint. Because when you are evaluating, why did I miss a question? Why did I score a question incorrect? It could be one of three reasons. It's either my knowledge information is not sound. I call that knowledge competency. And for the science sections, that's either foundational concepts, or your the core facts, or your understanding of the foundational concepts. But it could also be a thinking skill concern.
Right.
And the thinking skill could relate to one of the four scientific inquiry and reasoning skills that are part of the science sections. Or it could be a testing skill concern, which you just noted, which is sometimes we focus on what I do not know versus focusing on what you do know. And based on what you do know, with a testing strategy and thinking strategy, you can impeach options that are not likely and then come to a more optimal final correct answer. But when we focus on things we don't know, sometimes that can even be a trigger for the saboteur, and now we get discombobulated in the question.
Right.
So that process is one of the areas that we focus on a lot, error analysis, in our AME Mastery Series course for scholars who really need to have work in that area, because again, that's a behavior that's required. So I'm so really excited that you mentioned that as one of the key areas to put in as part of your strategic planning.
That's
for
my
MCAT
reflection
success.
piece,
That's
thinking
right.
back to we have a lot of history. And so, we've done a lot of work around, testing strategies. And so that was just over the years, one of the many incidents where I often go back, because it was a revelation moment for me. It was like, I didn't realize that I do that. And I do, as soon as you can't just automatically answer the question, it's the rumination or the catastrophizing
Yes.
thoughts of what I don't know. When if you focus on what you do know, you're, like you said, able to impeach these answers and get closer to the answer. And so Very well said, DT. And so that wraps up today's facilitated session. And so to close out our MCAT block for facilitated session, I'm going to have DT introduce what the topic is, because I know he's going to have fun with this as our expert facilitator. We'll be doing some questions. Yeah, so
Yes.
give us a little foreshadow for next
So
episode.
in our next facilitated session, we'll be focusing on execution of the MCAT blueprint, utilizing thinking and testing strategies for success, where we bring it all together, everything from our first facilitated session, starting strong with the right wellness mindset, this facilitated session where we understand now the blueprint, the structure, the skills, and a learning plan strategy. Now we're going to put it all together and execute it, and we're going to actually practice some MCAT questions in our next session with our scholars.
I know our scholars are looking forward to that. The questions, that's the meat and bones, that's
That's
the
it.
meat and potatoes. So, as DT said, we're going to get deeper into the scientific reasoning skills, and we're going to do that by actually going through some questions from the AAMC website. Is that correct?
And also for the critical analysis and reasoning skills section as well.
Gotcha. And so that closes today's facilitated session. Remember that we have a downloadable PDF worksheet for study planner that's going to be linked to our website. So please look at our website, and please reach out if you have a pre-medical student organization on an undergraduate campus and you would like to have us come by and do our MCAT workshop. Just reach out to us in our email or our DMs, and we'll see you at the next facilitated session.
That's right.
All right.